What happens in a death case? In a death case, some of the damages include pecuniary loss. What's the financial loss to the family as a result of this person's death? Is there any conscious pain and suffering? Let's take a look at the Joan Rivers matter, for example. Joan Rivers was under anesthesia during a colonoscopy at the time that she suffered irreversible brain damage, and now her family is bringing a lawsuit for wrongful death. Well, we know that she has tremendous economic loss, and that will be the biggest component of her case. Because if the patient had no conscious level of awareness of what was going on, about the problems that she was enduring, then it will be virtually impossible, if not extremely challenging, to show to a jury that she was conscious and aware of what horrible things were happening to her. So what usually occurs in a death case is we look for the pain and suffering. That's normally the biggest component. But in her case, it's going to be the other way around with economic loss. What happens, though, if the patient is not working and is elderly? What are the damages then? Now you've got a big problem. Now there's no economic loss. There may be some pain and suffering, but now you also have another problem to think about. You must assume that an elderly person is on Medicare, and you must also assume that her medical treatment was paid for by Medicare. Why is that important? Because if you are successful, Medicare will come to you at the end of the case and say, pay us back. All of it, most of it, some of it. They want to be paid back, and guess what? We are obligated to pay them back. And then we have to negotiate with them. Let me share with you a quick story about how Medicare almost destroyed a client's case of mine. A disabled young man who was working, crossing the street, gets hit by a car, suffered traumatic injuries, fractured femur, horrible internal damage, was intubated for 2.5 weeks. His sister calls me and says, please take my brother's case. Within a few weeks, I was able to get the full insurance policy, $100,000, for this horribly injured gentleman. What we didn't know at the time, well, we knew Medicare paid for his bill, but we didn't have the bill. It's only 2 months later does Medicare send us the information saying, okay, we paid $350,000, pay us back. I said, after my expenses, after my attorney's fee, he's going to be left with nothing. They said, hand it over. I said, no. I didn't take this case just to walk away with a fee. I took this case to help this injured patient and injured victim. And through negotiation and appeals and ongoing appeals, we ultimately were able to resolve it so that the client actually walked away with $10,000, which is horrible. But the reality is his medical care would not have gotten paid had he not been receiving Medicare. So had I known that information at the outset, I never would have taken on this case, because you don't take a case just to generate a fee. You want to help the client. So that's why it's critical for you to know whether or not the patient has Medicare or Medicaid. They are both must be repaid, and you have to negotiate with them. You need to know whether or not an autopsy was done. So remember I talked about at the very beginning about a gentleman whose father died from a massive blood clot to the lungs known as a saddle embolus. How did we know that? Because an autopsy was done. We knew what the cause of death was. If there's no autopsy, and not everyone does one, but if there's no autopsy, we won't know the precise cause of death. If we don't know the precise cause of death, it may be impossible to show why this gentleman died. And if we can't show why he died, now working backwards, it's going to be very difficult, very challenging to show that there were departures from good and accepted medical care.